Welcome to the Empowered Women Life Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Karen Bashford. This podcast is for every woman who has ever felt limited by her past, silenced by trauma, or held back by society's expectations. Each week, we will share powerful stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you become the leader of your own life. Today, I have a guest who I consider is somebody who is vital in our world of mental health issues. And that is Kay Reeve, as an emotional awareness expert, author, and TEDx speaker who's passionate about mental well-being. Now, I could go and tell you a whole load of spiel, but I'm not about to, because I want Kay to tell you, in her own words, something about herself and how she got involved in mental health. Over to you, Kay. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Karen. That was a lovely intro. How did I get involved in mental health? It's, for me, emotional well-being is actually going way back to when I had my son. He was always quite stressed and depressed, even as a child. And he first tried to take his own life at the age of 8, very young. The same year he was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. He had a lot of bullying in school as well. Found it very stressful, and unfortunately it wasn't just other children, it was also staff that were causing a lot of the problems. And we hit a brick wall, so we ended up home educating my son to try and keep him from committing suicide, because by the time I deregistered him, he'd been suicidal every single day for a year.
That's horrendous.
Yeah, and at that point we'd actually got a letter from the LEA saying he doesn't need an assessment, and we didn't know where else to turn. He wasn't getting any support that he needed. We'd managed to get funding to get him support in school, but then the school had the rights to go, well, we need that funding elsewhere. So they then moved the funding and said, we don't need it for him, and his needs are not as bad as other people's. And we got gaslit so badly in the school system. He was abused in the school system. And so we ended up home educating. But by the time he was 15, I finally managed to get him to a psychologist appointment. So I waited 7 years to get him to this appointment. And on the day, he was having a better day and just said, oh, Mum's making it all up, I'm fine. So that was it, just dismissed him after all those years. And then I was left dealing with his temper and anger and meltdowns and tears and depression and stress for the next 5 years, until what was left was barely a shell of my son. He was verging on psychosis. He was in the darkest place ever. And I sat with him yet again. He was still suicidal on and off all those years. But I sat with him again in the car one night for 3 hours, trying to talk him out of that pit of depression. And it was during this conversation, I actually had the phone in my hand with a number on, ready to dial the mental health unit, because we were at the last straw. And it was in that moment, and he's saying, just give me another minute, Mum, give me another minute. And suddenly a light bulb went on for me. And I realized in that moment that he couldn't understand his emotions because he couldn't see them. And he's a visual learner. And many children and teenagers and adults on the autistic spectrum and with other neurodiversities find concepts difficult to understand. So at 19, he still couldn't tell me what day of the week it was. If you asked him to wait at a bus stop for 10 minutes, he couldn't tell you if he'd been there 2 minutes or 5 days. He had this total time blindness. So how was I supposed to get him to manage his own emotions? And I was completely burnt out from being his emotional paramedic 24/7 for years. And so realizing that he couldn't see his emotions, I was like, how can I teach him something that I don't understand? And we literally went inside. He put the kettle on and made me a cup of tea. And I started to draw something on a piece of paper and at the time it was little boxes, and I used colours to fill them in. And I started to talk to him about his emotions in terms of colour. And the result was, and I'm going to hold my book up here for anybody who is on audio, the result in the long term, skip forward a bit, was this book, Brain Unchained. And it's shining a torch on depression and lighting the way to emotional awareness in teenagers and young adults. But on the back cover is a diagram that describes how I saved my son. And it is the emotional cycle diagram. So it's a circle. We've got yellow at the top, because we talk about happiness as high vibration, feeling on top of the world, sunny and bright. So that's the yellow. But we talk about black, which is at the bottom of the cycle, as the pits, the darkness that people go into in depression, stuck in a rut, rock bottom. So that's at the bottom of the emotional cycle diagram. And I'm pretty sure, Karen, if I send you a little image of this diagram, you can add it to the
certainly to the podcast,
so people on audio can see it on the thumbnail.
Mm-hmm.
And then either side of the dark cycle, we've got the red and the blue, which is the anger and the sadness. And just using these four colors and talking to him about how when we go from happiness to depression, you know, we have to go down through something that makes us sad or something that makes us angry, and something drags us down there. And we can't go back to being happy without working through them, other than through shortcuts, which is addiction and negative behaviors. So there are ways to shortcut, but they're not effective in the long run.
Yeah.
So just using these 5 colors in this cycle, it completely turned around the ability to have a conversation with him right from that very first moment. And he was engaging in conversation with me instead of avoiding it. Within days, he was really embracing this process, and he was asking questions rather than just accepting information. And it literally was within weeks to months, instead of him having 3-hour pits of depression, even though he was always depressed and stressed and anxious, those really deep, dark pits where he was suicidal, which were usually at least 3-hour episodes. Honestly, I felt so amazed one day when he rang me up while I was at work and said, "Mum, I just talked myself out of one in 10 minutes.
Wow.
Oh, I felt so empowering to just think that he could now manage his own emotions. He had the tools to do it. And if that was the difference, was a little diagram and a little bit of conversation with him day after day until he grasped this, after all those years that we'd been waiting for support and help and it hadn't come in the right form, it ended up being me as a mum that stepped up and made the difference. So it would then literally, within weeks again of him saying that we were sitting in a cafe having a cup of coffee, and one of his friends just walked in and sat down with us. And while Matthew went off to order his friend a coffee, his mate says, "I've realised that hanging around with Matt makes me a better person."
Oh, how lovely.
It's like, oh my goodness, wow. And I knew that he'd been helping this friend off the back of me helping him, because he'd been secretly asking me questions because of this strategy already. And it was still boxes on a bit of paper then. And I was like, I really need to do something with this. You know, if he's helping other people that quickly, I need to keep developing this. And so it over the next 2 years became a little bit more attractive, going from the boxes through to the emotional cycle diagram. And I literally opened my mind to observing everything in the universe around me through, you know, literal face-to-face conversation, whether it was just watching people around me at work, on the television, the news, listening to music, whatever it was that I picked up or watched or saw or heard, I was absorbing all of it and processing it against this diagram to make sure that I got the dynamics of the diagram absolutely spot on. And after doing that for 2 years, I then spent another year watching more programs, and I was finding some of the top people on YouTube, like Tony Robbins, Sadhguru, Ralph Smart, and a few others, Jay Shetty and so on. And I was watching a lot of their videos to see if anything they said could break this diagram, because I did not want to go out and deliver it if there was any way that I'd made a mistake in it. because lives are at stake over it.
Mm.
So at the end of that, it had actually then expanded to a 3-part framework. Because I realized that when we talk about changing between emotions because something changed, that there are only 5 changes in the whole world that can happen. And I'd categorized that down. And that was probably one of the longest parts of this for me, was working out what change was. How can we explain a world of infinite possibilities of change to a teenager with their whole life ahead of them in one single process? And that was where, for me, I worked out these 5 changes. And from there, I ended up finding root causes as well. So there's 5 changes, and then every change has a root cause. So it became this understand the emotions. Really, for me, was the part I needed my son to understand. But then the changes and the root causes were the parts as a parent that gave me the tools for talking to him, to question him, to ask more questions, to offer him possible solutions, never to tell him what to do. I never told him what to do. I always let him make the choices. But it was giving him that freedom to feel like he was making his own progress. And so in the end, my 3-part framework became the mood mentor model, as it's called. It was in 2017 that I felt so proud the day that he stood beside me in the auditorium before and posed for a photograph with me, bless him, before I went and did my TEDx talk. And he completely turned around by then. And honestly, since then, I just couldn't be more proud of him. And I've actually just posted on Facebook today, actually, that I know he's in a good space mentally at the moment because he's writing his books again. So he also loves writing. But he's had a few years out parenting, working, sorting life out. But he's amazing now, 30 years old, parent of 2. He's father of 2 little girls, absolutely beautiful. And he does an amazing job with them.
So he's obviously learnt from the experience that you went through with him,
Yeah.
but also obviously from what you learnt yourself to be able to help him understand his own emotions.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, I'm a visual learner.
Right.
I find it really hard to absorb information through auditory.
Yeah.
I actually had an epiphany last night as to a project that I'm pushing forward that I would not push the button on.
Ah.
And that was because I hadn't actually visually seen the item I developed in form. It'd been on computer, which is entirely different to actually physically seeing it.
Wow. Yeah.
So we all have different ways, even within the spectrum of visual or auditory and such like I know some people can listen to podcasts or anything for hours and hours and hours. The only thing I can listen to for hours is music.
Yeah.
Now you put something in front of me visually and I'll quite happily spend my time watching it with no trouble at all.
Yeah.
So how are you utilizing what you've learned and what you've put in your book into the big wide world? Because obviously this can help so many children.
Yeah.
So tell us how you're doing that then.
Yeah. For me, this is still early days setting up the business. I've rebuilt my website last year, so that's out there. That's kayreeve.co.uk. And on there is the books available. I've written more books since, but they're more about coping with the stress of parenting, mindfulness books, journals, and notebooks. But for Brain Unchained, there is a dedicated page on there for that, which also leads through to Amazon where it's available. But there's also courses online. So there's to understand that emotional cycle diagram, I've got a introductory course on there for free. So it's just register up and follow through the process. It's about 10 minutes, but it gives you just enough for parents who are in that desperate state and haven't got days and weeks and hours to study. It gives them just enough to be able to start that conversation with their teenagers the way I did with my son. And I've put that one out there for free because that to me is the crucial part that is going to, in that absolute pivotal moment, is going to help save lives. And then from there, to keep working on that personal development, I've also got one which is about a safe space for talking. Because to me, from a point of being a parent, that was one of the best strategies I could use with both of my children, was to offer them a safe space for talking, like completely judgmental free, open, as if they're in a therapy room, but without the therapist. I had to provide that for them instead. And I found that was a different mentality for me than parenting. So there's one thing is like, I am a parent today, you're going to do what we do. This is the running order. We're going to get to this place, we're going to get there on time. Versus the times when they needed to sit and offload and I needed to just sit and listen without making judgment, without giving orders. So I always made it clear with both my children when I was in the mentoring role, listening, versus the parenting role, no, this is what's going on today. And they appreciated that and they accepted that. And we still do that even in their 30s. And so there's always something. They never stop being your children. So believe me, this is not just a case of, even when you go for therapy, there might be 6, 10, 12 sessions. But what happens after that when you expect somebody else to fix your children? So by stepping into that mentoring role, I'm always there for them right through into adulthood. And this is what I want to see more parents doing. So with the books and the courses, the other one that I'm now offering is one-to-one mentoring. So I can work privately with parents who want to learn this full strategy. I mean, if you've got 6 children coming up to teenage years, believe me, it's going to be worth working one-to-one to get them all through this. But it's going to be different for everybody. And also because a lot of children, like my son, have gone through those teenage years into adulthood, and they're now in education systems and work environments in particular. I'm also more than happy to work with schools and workplaces, whether it's even colleges and universities, to bring this in group work or support work, or even big corporations with bespoke videos, where I can provide this information to help people in all settings. Because as human beings, we exist in 3 places, and that's home, education, and work, and socially as well, but that comes under home. So for me, the books and the online courses are there to help people at home, and the one-to-one mentoring if anybody reaches out. But for me, doing public speaking and group work and video work means I can also reach people in education and employment as well. And that way, I'm not excluding anybody from getting help if they really, really need it. And I'm not replacing other therapies either, because all personal development books, and if I'm pointing at the moment for Karen, all my personal development books on my shelf are all there because they're all trying to resolve emotional issues. Every personal development framework is there to help resolve an emotional issue with a step-by-step process of how to understand it. So whatever the change is, it is a way to cope with it, kind of thing. But when the emotional self-awareness is not there first, that's where these teenagers and young adults can't yet access personal development, because they haven't got enough self-awareness to take those next steps. So by learning this opens them all up to the world of personal development. And I guarantee nearly every time I go and see my son, there's a new personal development book on his desk or on his shelf or in his bag. Once he got this, he loved reading and he's always picking books up. But it was getting him on that step first where he could then access that himself. So yes, however somebody wants help, reach out, I can help.
Okay, so obviously you said you were burnt out basically when you finally got to that point where you could help your son. How did that leave you? And this is quite a personal question, so apologies if you don't want to answer it. How did that leave you as a mother and as a woman, having been through all you've been through with your son? How were you physically yourself? Close to burnout, I can appreciate, but that's different for everyone.
Yeah.
So tell me how you were in yourself and what did you do to help yourself? Because you obviously had to continue supporting your son and your other child. So how did you cope?
A lot of the time I didn't. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of stress and anxiety. It put a lot of strain on my marriage. I'm since divorced. So amazingly, we got through all of this and the divorce came afterwards, but probably for different reasons. But it did put a tremendous amount of stress on us. And also my husband and my son were very much at odds with each other anyway, always clashing. My ex-husband was the typical, like, no, this is how I say it, you do it how I say, and couldn't make that safe space connection with him in the same way. I'd spend hours working with my son. My husband could walk in the door and say one thing, and that was it. It was all undone in seconds. And that's what had happened the night I was sitting in the car with him when he was suicidal again. I'd spent hours working with him earlier that day already, listening to him, and then my husband walked in and went, "Oh, you here asleep and on or sitting on the sofa again or something." And it was just something he said, and that was all. That work had gone again instantly. And that was when he went into the suicidal state that night. So it was very, very stressful for me. And like I said, I think my nerves were barely hanging on a thread. And every single day I was scared of getting phone calls, whether or not to say he was behind bars or coming home in a wooden box, or, I didn't know what was going to happen from day to day. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And so for me to literally go from that to within weeks and months, him saying, "Oh, I've talked myself out of one today," was like such a relief. I felt like I could breathe again. And the best one of all, I mean, I was working on this with him for about 2 years until it took, to be in that deeper state with depression as he was, it's not even just a quick change, but there was enough change for me to know that he was not suicidal anymore. But there was still an awful lot for him to catch up on with emotional awareness, with self-awareness, building up his resilience, learning different strategies, because then it was then tagging on a lot of the other personal development strategies, right? So you were happy, then all of a sudden you're in a rage about something. What changed and how could we approach it differently? So there was lots of personal development strategies to tie in as well en route. And apart from that, at the time, I didn't have the book. I didn't have the strategy. I was developing it as we went along. So it was a lot of conflict for me as well. Like, of all the people that have lived in this world over millions of years, why me? Why have I come up with this? What am I supposed to do with it? I was in a job, a well-paying job at the time, and I ended up leaving a corporate job to pursue this. And that was burnout from that as well, because supporting him, working my way out of that job, and I'd also decided to train as a public speaker at the same time. So I was doing extra study, trying to develop this, support him, do my work, trying to keep my marriage intact. And somehow I just felt like this drive was the only thing keeping me going, that if I ever stopped, I would completely collapse. And unfortunately, that is what did happen in 2021. After I was divorced, living alone, we'd had the second lockdown. I got locked down with my husband during the breakup, during the first one.
No comment.
No. And then so the second lockdown was like, oh my goodness, never lived alone in my life. I'm now told at the one point, like literally, I just lost another job the day we went into that lockdown. And I'm like, I've now got 28 days, the one time in life when I need my social circle around me, and I'm being told I can't see anyone. So I thought, right, I'm going to make the most of this. Every writer's dream to have 28 days uninterrupted. Going to write my book at last. So that's what I did at the end of 2020. And then 2021, because we were still in lockdown and nothing else was happening, and even though I know all of the emotional awareness, that was when I got to that point where I always said, if I ever stop, I'm going to collapse. And I did. And so I then spent the next 3 years working through not just depression, but I had other health issues going on as well. So at the end of 2023, I'd then lost the ability to communicate, but it turned out some of mine was actually illness as well. I was tested for heart attack, stroke, and early onset Alzheimer's because I'd literally stopped being able to communicate through voice. I'd lost the connection between my brain and the ability to actually choose the words to speak. I had no words, so I'd go to say something and there was nothing. It's like the universe had stolen my words. And I ended up being told again by GPs, oh, it's just depression, take antidepressants, you'll be fine. And all my gut issues would be fine, you know, if I was to just take antidepressants. And I'm like, no, I'm not depressed anymore. It's not that. And I had to stick my grounds. And now the strategy that I'd written to help save my son was running around my head, and I kept digging through it for answers. When I talk about if something changed in your emotions, what changed? And I'm looking at, well, why can't I change my emotions back? What's keeping them stuck? So I was looking at it from the other end. And I ended up getting allergy testing privately through the post. And it came back telling me I'm allergic to 9 major food groups. Not even just 9 foods, but 9 food groups. And I had been poisoning myself day on day with just a healthy diet even. What seemed like a healthy diet was not healthy at all for me. And so last year was my journey of recovery from that. And it wasn't till about July I really felt confident enough to talk on camera again. So yes, my own journey on the back of all of that, it really caught up with me in the long run. And it's been amazing to have my family there supporting me for a change. Apart from my ex, of course, but my children have been there supporting me, and it's been great. I'm here today. That's the main one. I'm here today.
And you've now got a passion and purpose to get this message out. We're all given a purpose, even if we don't know it at the time, and even if we have to go through breakdowns, breakthroughs, or whatever to find it. We always come at some point to our purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that causes a lot of people problems, because we forget that a purpose doesn't have to be world encompassing. It can be such a small thing of just being the parent of your children. But we're all led to believe, oh, you've got to have a purpose. But no, you're just lucky if you get this big purpose of like your ability to help teenagers understand their emotions, whereas mine is helping women get past trauma and abuse. And we have our own stories to that. So tell me one thing that you would say to any parent facing potentially what you went through. What would you say to them?
Never give up. That was my big mantra through everything, was never give up. Because I always said, if I give up hope, hope is the last thing I ever have left. And I would not give up hope. And that kept me going. And the other one was to sometimes just sit back and stop thinking. And that's not easy to say somebody with ADHD, which was another discovery I made a few years back about myself, is it's not easy to sit back and stop thinking. But now and again, you get that moment where you're in a peaceful place and nothing else is going on. And that is when the universe gives you the answers you've been looking for. So don't always stress and strive to find the answers. Sometimes you have to stop thinking. And pretty much what happened that night in the car with my son was that moment where he says, like, just give me a minute, Mum. 3 hours into this conversation, I'm exhausted. It's dark. We're sitting in the car. He's saying, give me a minute. And while he's just sitting there saying, give me a minute, I'm like, okay, I've got a minute to breathe. And I looked away. I took a breath and relaxed for a moment. And that was when these answers came to me. So one is, don't overthink things. And sometimes, you know, and the other one is, not all parents are going to find their own answers the way I did. And you don't have to, because I'm here now and I've done this and I've been through this and I've been developing this for 9 years. So you don't have to do it alone. Reach out, go and check out the website. I do my own Parenting Teens podcast weekly on YouTube. I've got the books, I've got the courses, I can do the one-to-one mentoring. So don't spend years and years struggling if it means that you could literally turn things around within days and weeks, because it's all possible.
And that's the trouble, isn't it? We just assume that everything takes a long time. And yet we live in a world which requires instant fixes. But when it comes to healing ourselves, we think it's going to take forever.
Yeah.
Which is sad, really, isn't it? So, yeah.
And that's a good point, actually. One thing I always say as well is you cannot fix your teenagers. You can only be there beside them while they fix themselves. And even my son said that to me. It was 2 years down the line. He sat there one day and he said to me, he said, "Thank you for never giving up on me, Mum." And that was a big day for me. He said, "Thank you for never giving up on me." He said, "I appreciate that you were there for me all the time." He said, "And I know you couldn't fix my depression for me. That was mine to work through." He said, "But just you being there and talking to me every day about it," he said, "it was like shining a torch." And he said, "Some days I know I was a pain in the arse and didn't make progress." He said, "But just you doing that meant I could plan for the next day." He said, "Some days I didn't take steps, but some days I knew I could plan for the day ahead." And then he finished it. Yeah, I'm gonna say, and then he finished it by saying something that really told me that we had won the battle, if you want to call it that, won the battle against depression. He said, "I now know why steel is forged in the fire." He said, "The more you go through it, the tougher you get." We've done it. And that to me was the day that absolutely epitomized that he recognized his healing journey and that he was ready to embrace life, not run from it, not heal from it, but embrace it. And he has done ever since.
And that's a beautiful point to finish on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and being part of this podcast. I am sure that anyone watching the video or even listening are going to get so many moments of, that explains a lot for themselves and their teenagers, because I'm sure that there's people on this listening that are going to realise that this sounds very familiar. So thank you so much for coming along. And I'm sure we're going to land up speaking again somewhere, because this is a subject that needs to be put out into the world so much more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
There is not enough support for the amount of children waiting for mental health support. And if parents can step in and take the onus and help them heal so much sooner, that's a bonus for everybody. We can't put a price on that.
Absolutely not. So thank you very much indeed.